The last known eruption of the volcano was in 1857, and in the decades that followed, hardly anybody thought it would erupt again. Suddenly, in early 1980, the mountain began to show signs of life.
We were just doing our normal stuff, and then one day we got a notice that Mount St. Helens was becoming active, and we were to leave the area for a while, at least until they could understand. And the first notice was some very deep, long earthquakes that indicated, because they were right under the mountain, that it was something occurring inside of the mountain. As days followed and the mountain cleared up, we started seeing some cracks forming, very large cracks forming in the mountain. And then day after day, there began a buildup. And what we didn't know what was happening, but there was a magma pool forming in the mountain.
The mountain first became active in March 20th. There was one seismometer, and the folks from the University of Washington seismology lab went down and confirmed that there was earthquake activity. So there was some scrambling that went on as the earthquake activity built to establish additional seismometers around the volcano.
For those who grew up in the Pacific Northwest, the sight of a volcano's snow-capped peaks always brought a sense of awe and beauty, but hardly ever a feeling of danger.
I can remember being in a classroom and we were talking about the Cascade Mountains and being told Mount St. Helens was a dormant volcano. I never imagined it ever had the potential for doing what it did.
A lot of these guys have been around here all their lives, families that homesteaded in the valley here. Stories of their dads and granddads that had worked out here also. So the general feeling was this was not going to be anything big.
I mean, everybody's got a volcano that's idling somewhere around them, you know, but nobody expects to ever have to deal with it or be there when it happens, because it's, you know, hundreds or thousands of years in between. I'd be long gone before that thing would ever erupt. That's what we used to talk about.
After the volcano began to rumble, concerns grew for the safety of the people who live around here. So authorities established a red zone around the volcano and then set up roadblocks around it. And that created its own set of problems.
There was recognition that there was a substantial immediate hazard to the valley that was north and west of the volcano. And so the evacuations were from that, and then the Forest Service, of course, had evacuated about 1 million acres on the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest.
Well, wait a minute, you can't talk about, closing things down, and people who lived up here, or people who had vacation cabins up here. And, and then it got into the constitutional rights of you can't bar me from my property.
You would have two kinds of people, some that ran away from it and moved out of the area because they were afraid of what might happen, and others who were excited about what would happen. And so they were up here trying to sneak behind gates and get onto our land, and people from all over the world claiming to be amateur geologists and having the right to come up here and study this thing and take pictures, amateur photographers.
They had all kinds of excuses why they needed to get past me. Well, is it worth your life? You need to have some kind of an evidence that they're in real danger before you keep the family out of their house. And like I said, the event status was up and down for weeks. And so it kind of got to be tiresome as far as getting your adrenaline running to react. And also because of the politics, the guy that lived 1 mile in the red zone wanted to go home. There was no reason he couldn't. Tell me why I can't go home. What's happening? And there wasn't a good reason at that time. Nobody had any experience with volcanoes in the continental U.S. much.
Of course, there are some people who are not all that surprised when the mountain came alive. If you know where to look, there's evidence all over this area of past eruptions, such as Silver Lake, which is the product of a mud flow from a long time ago.
On the south side of Mount St. Helens, we have the Ape Caves and the cave basalt lava flows, which are a tremendous attraction. And they're from one period, as far as we know, in Mount St. Helens history, about a couple thousand years ago, when Mount St. Helens did produce a more mafic, deeper flowed magma, these basaltic eruptions. You can find ash from Mount St. Helens from past eruptions way up in Canada. So it's been a major ash producer, and these large vertical ashfall eruptions have been an important occurrence in the past.
With the knowledge of past eruptions, scientists went to work on trying to estimate what could happen next.
There was a lot of discussion, as you can imagine, about what the mountain was doing and what it was not.
They thought that we would have a vertical blast, that all past eruptions indicated that that's what Mount St. Helens does.
And what we knew was that this volcano could explode and was known for explosive eruptions.
Visibly, the mountain was changing, and as it changed, I think even the people that have worked here a long time started realizing that this is not normal. Still didn't anticipate what actually did happen.
And what geologists tell us is that the magma was rising, the hot molten rock was rising within the volcano. As it came up into this very wet snow cone of a mountain, was drying out the inside of the mountain, and there was pressurized steam which was erupting out of the summit.
After the initial steam eruptions, scientists put more instruments on or near the mountain to try to figure out what was going to happen next and how soon. To their great alarm, St. Helens began to grow.
The instrumentation at that time, 30 years ago, was much more primitive than we have today. As a matter of fact, a fairly new instrument available to the geologists at the time were these laser rangefinders, surveying device. And they actually had a new one that they had purchased that they brought up to Mount St. Helens, and they were putting targets, prisms on the side of the volcano and shooting a laser beam at them, and at very precise timing it would time the speed that it took the light to go forward and back. These things are set up to measure millimeters of motion, like the growth of your fingernail type rate. They were getting parts of a meter of motion. It was moving 5 feet a day, and they thought the instruments were incorrect. So they sent the instrument back to be recalibrated, and no, it was correct, and it was swelling at that rate.
It doesn't take any kind of a scientist really to tell you that if the side of a mountain is growing by several feet a day, that something really bad's going to happen.
The mountain was being split into two by the rising magma, and this tremendous bulge appeared throughout late March and April, and that ultimately is what collapsed.
With imminent danger on a magnitude never seen before, authorities redoubled their efforts to get people out of harm's way. But a few chose to stay despite the danger, most notably Harry Truman.
He was a stubborn old guy. He just was going to stay there. It wasn't going to happen, And you either loved him or hated him.
Even those outside the red zone were warned of possible danger and to be prepared. Authorities knew the mountain was ready to do something, but what and when was beyond anyone's wildest guess.
I think those people who were trying to prepare for the worst case scenario had no idea that their worst case scenario was better than the one that we got.
When we return, Mount St. Helens unleashes its full fury in a 9-hour massive eruption.